Ex-wife and mistress team up, gather evidence, and destroy the cheating millionaire husband. Prepare to witness a tale of glamour, deceit, and unexpected solidarity that will make your heart race and your jaw drop. In this riveting story, a seemingly perfect millionaire, Leonard Harrington, appears to have it all: opulent mansions, luxury cars, and the kind of swagger only the ultra-wealthy can exude. But beneath the sparkling veneer lies a web of secrets, an explosive affair, and two scorned women who refuse to remain victims. Strap yourself in as his wife and mistress unite, determined to unmask the lies, gather damning evidence, and orchestrate his ultimate downfall. Keep watching. This story's twists will leave you breathless. Leonard Harrington was the kind of man who never went unnoticed in a room. Standing a little over 6 feet tall with a meticulous haircut and a collection of tailored suits that draped his athletic frame perfectly, he radiated an air of old money. Born into a wealthy family that boasted board positions at Morgan Stanley, Leonard seemed destined for prosperity. But the wealth he inherited was only part of his success story. Armed with charisma, charm, and cunning intelligence, he had built a small empire of investments, from real estate to luxury spa resorts. Every piece of his carefully curated life sparkled with opulence. His wife, Beatrice Harrington, came from a more modest background. Though extremely intelligent and poised, she hadn't been raised among the wealthy elite. She was a talented artist, known for painting mesmerizing landscapes that whispered of hidden emotions. She had been captivated by Leonard from the moment she laid eyes on him at a gallery event, seduced by his confidence and exotic promises of a life beyond her wildest dreams. Over the years, Beatrice had grown accustomed to fancy dinners at the Waldorf Astoria, lavish parties in private yachts, and extended stays in London penthouses. It was a fairy tale, or so it seemed. Beneath the sparkle and polite smiles, Beatrice often felt like a gilded bird in a cage. She tried to dismiss these feelings as mere jitters. After all, she loved painting in her private studio, funded entirely by Leonard's generosity. She had friends in high places, invitations to exclusive galas, and even philanthropic committees clamoring for her name. Who was she to complain about the pangs of emptiness gnawing at her heart? Unbeknownst to Beatrice, Leonard was nursing a secret. He had a mistress named Dahlia Pierce, a marketing executive who possessed the kind of wit and ambition that most men found irresistible. Dahlia had grown tired of fleeting encounters and increasingly hazy promises that Leonard would figure out the right time to reveal their affair. She came from a middle-class family, had clawed her way into her position, and believed fervently in self-reliance. Part of Dahlia knew this dalliance with a married man was a dangerous game, ethically precarious and emotionally volatile, yet she couldn't disentangle herself from the intoxicating rush of Leonard's attentions. Night after night, Dahlia found herself in 5-star suites or chauffeur-driven rides that Leonard arranged, each dripping with stolen moments of passion. He had promised her the world, whispering sweet nothings about leaving his wife eventually, building a different life together. The hush money was good, the gifts were better, and the fleeting hopes of a future with him felt like a shot of adrenaline directly to her heart. She told herself she was in control until she realized just how heavily the guilt weighed on her. And in that guilt, the seeds of discontent began to sprout. Fate often has a peculiar way of bringing people together. The unholy alliance that would form between Beatrice and Dahlia started with an unexpected encounter in the corridor of one of Leonard's luxury hotels. Beatrice, scheduled to oversee the art direction for the hotel's grand reopening, arrived unannounced one afternoon. Dahlia, meeting with the head of marketing for that same project, stepped out of her meeting just as Beatrice was stepping in. They locked eyes for a moment, each struck by an odd sense of familiarity, though they had never formally met. A spark of curiosity ignited in Dahlia, and a pang of suspicious clarity pulsed in Beatrice. They exchanged polite smiles, and that was that. But that single moment, two women crossing paths amidst the glitter of Leonard's grand ambitions, would soon set a chain of events in motion, unlike anything either had anticipated. Beatrice, perceptive as ever, noticed hints of Dahlia's perfume lingering in the hallway. A floral bouquet that was undeniably feminine and alluring, the kind that doesn't fade quickly. It triggered a memory of a different day, a different place, when Leonard returned from a business meeting wearing the very same scent. A wave of anxiety washed over her. She brushed it off, convincing herself it was a coincidence. After all, how many high-powered businesswomen might wear the same fragrance? Yet, the smell haunted her that night at dinner. She found herself watching Leonard more closely, picking up on the subtle signals that hinted at secrets. He was a touch more restless than usual, his phone constantly buzzing with incoming notifications, and he excused himself more frequently than normal. She observed the tension tightening his jaw. Though not yet certain, a wisp of suspicion began to unfurl in her mind. For Dahlia, meeting Beatrice face to face delivered a jolt of stark, sobering truth. The wife was no phantom figure locked away in some gilded tower. She was beautiful, poised, and more real than Dahlia had ever allowed herself to imagine. The image of Beatrice's gentle smile and inquisitive eyes followed Dahlia home that night. As she played with the keychain Leonard had gifted her, shaped like a delicate silver heart, something inside her shifted. She had grown tired of playing second fiddle, but the guilt of hurting another woman and possibly destroying a family pressed down on her with renewed urgency. Little did either woman know that the tenuous threads of suspicion and guilt that bound them were about to tighten dramatically. The tapestry of Leonard's life, a tapestry carefully woven from half-truths and deceptions, was about to unravel in a most unexpected manner. The lush Harrington estate was a place of serene beauty on the outside. Vast lawns rolled out like green carpets on which peacocks sometimes strutted, a testament to Leonard's taste for the exquisite. A cobblestone driveway led to a Victorian-style mansion with tall columns and grand windows. The interior, filled with priceless art and antiques, offered a labyrinth of corridors that led to hidden reading nooks and secret drawers. It was in one of these discreet corners, a small side room used for storage, that Beatrice made her first major discovery. On an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, she had been searching for an old sketchbook. Leonard was out for a business meeting, presumably at one of his up-and-coming real estate projects. Beatrice rummaged through boxes, unearthing memories of old photographs, personal letters, and ticket stubs from lavish European vacations. Hidden underneath a stack of press clippings about Leonard was a small black notebook. She opened it out of curiosity. What she found inside made her heart pound in her chest. The notebook contained notes that seemed to detail transactions and personal appointments. Several entries mentioned Dahlia's name. At first, the scribbles appeared coded time slots, strange abbreviations, references to lunch or dinner at discreet restaurants. The repetition of Dahlia's name, combined with booking confirmations for upscale hotels, left no room for confusion. Leonard had taken scrupulous care to record his clandestine trysts, or at least some details of them. Beatrice felt her stomach lurch. A coldness swept over her body as the shocking reality settled in. Leonard was having an affair. She fought back tears, resisting the urge to scream and tear the place apart. For a fleeting moment, she thought she might burn the notebook, pretend she had never seen it. The idea of confronting Leonard seemed terrifying, yet the seeds of righteous fury had already taken root. She remembered the fleeting glance with Dahlia in the hotel corridor, the lingering perfume, the subtle tension in Leonard's demeanor. Piece by piece, the puzzle was falling into place. And with each piece, her heartbreak found a new companion, anger. Meanwhile, Dahlia was increasingly unsettled by Leonard's shifting attitudes. Though she had never felt truly secure in their relationship, she noticed he was growing more possessive while also distancing himself at the strangest times. One moment, he showered her with affection, exquisite jewelry, spontaneous getaways, hush-hush dinners, and the next he acted cold and dismissive. Dahlia suspected something more than just the usual guilt weighed on him. She also noticed that whenever she tried to discuss their future, his eyes grew distant. The excuses piled up. "I have to handle some urgent family business," or "the time isn't right just yet." More and more, she caught glimpses of the manipulator beneath the polished exterior. Then came the day she saw him with another woman at a restaurant near her workplace. A different woman, neither Beatrice nor Dahlia. Confused, Dahlia hurried away before Leonard spotted her, but the sight tore at her. He had his arms around this stranger, whispering intimately in her ear. Was Leonard cheating on Dahlia as well? The notion sounded absurd at first, but given he was already cheating on Beatrice with Dahlia, it wasn't impossible. How far did his deception go? Haunted by the possibility, Dahlia contemplated confronting him, but she worried he would turn the tables, maybe even threaten to cut her off financially or ruin her reputation at the marketing firm. He had that kind of power. Restlessness consumed her nights. She would stare at the digital clock in her bedroom while the city lights flickered beyond her curtains, pondering how she'd allowed herself to spiral into such a predicament. An opportunity for truth arrived in the form of a mutual acquaintance. Victoria Rains was a socialite known for her charity events, a woman who seemed to know everyone's secrets. Leonard had once called her the ultimate connector. Dahlia, feeling desperate for answers, confided in Victoria, who in turn offered cryptic tidbits about Leonard's colourful history of affairs, hush money, and cover-ups. "He's done this before," Victoria hinted over cappuccinos at a downtown cafe. "I can't prove it, but watch your back. He has a particular skill for twisting people's loyalty to protect himself." Disturbed by what she heard, Dahlia felt an undercurrent of betrayal flooding her senses. Her moral dilemma turned suffocating. She despised being the other woman, but she now realized she might be just another pawn in Leonard's grand game. She wanted out preferably without her world crashing down. But how? As fate would have it, the perfect storm began to brew when Beatrice called Dahlia directly one evening. Until that moment, they had never properly spoken outside that brief hallway glance. The phone call startled Dahlia, who hesitated before answering. Beatrice's voice was steady, subdued, yet carrying an unmistakable intensity. "Dahlia," she said, "I want to talk to you about Leonard. You and I both know what's going on." There was no accusation in her tone, just a calm determination. Dahlia's heart pounded. She expected rage, screaming, maybe even threats. But Beatrice was different, collected, direct, almost eerily calm. The emotional charge of the moment hung in the silence that followed. Dahlia swallowed hard. "How did you get my number?" Dahlia asked, her voice trembling. "That doesn't matter," Beatrice replied. "I'm not calling you to fight. I want the truth, and I suspect you do too." They agreed to meet at a discreet cafe in a quieter part of town, and so two women, both bound by heartbreak, betrayal, and a desire for answers, prepared to step into uncharted territory. Neither knew if they could trust the other, but something told them they had no choice. In that moment, Leonard was entirely unaware of the seismic shift about to occur in his carefully orchestrated life. While he indulged in illusions of control, his wife and his mistress were about to cross the line from rivals to unlikely allies. And the catalyst for that transformation was a potent mixture of pain, fury, and the shared goal of unveiling the truth. The dimly lit corner of the cafe provided just enough privacy for secret confessions. Beatrice arrived first, cloaked in a simple black coat, her hair pulled back in a neat chignon. She'd chosen a table by the window where the glow of streetlights gave the illusion of safety against the darkness of the night outside. She felt a swirl of emotions: fear, anticipation, indignation, knowing she was moments away from confronting the woman who had been sleeping with her husband. When Dahlia walked in, Beatrice almost had to catch her breath. Dahlia was more stunning up close than Beatrice had expected, exuding an air of confident elegance in her tailored blazer and pencil skirt. She approached the table with uncertain steps, her eyes darting around to gauge any potential threat. "Beatrice," Dahlia said, voice soft but resonant. "Thank you for coming," Beatrice replied, gesturing for her to sit. They ordered drinks. Beatrice settled for chamomile tea, something gentle to calm her nerves, while Dahlia ordered a double espresso, hoping the caffeine would shore up her courage. The silence between them hummed with tension and unspoken questions. "So, you said we both know what's going on," Dahlia began, swirling the espresso in its small cup. "You want me to confirm?" Beatrice nodded slowly. "I found a notebook. It had your name, repeated many times with details that, well, they suggest you and Leonard have been seeing each other for quite some time." Guilt crashed over Dahlia like a wave. She felt exposed, cornered, but also strangely relieved. There was no more hiding from the wife. The facade was gone, replaced by a harsh clarity. "Yes," she admitted at last, voice catching. "I'm not proud of it. Leonard made promises, said he'd leave you, that he wasn't in love anymore, that he was trapped in a marriage of convenience. I know it's not an excuse." She paused, forcing herself to meet Beatrice's steady gaze. "I need you to know I never intended to destroy your marriage. I truly believed him." Beatrice's lips tightened, but her voice remained measured. "I'm not here to judge you. Leonard is the one who made vows to me. But there is something you should know. This might be bigger than both of us." She hesitated, lowering her voice. "He's not just having an affair with you." Dahlia's eyes widened. "You mean that woman at the restaurant?" Beatrice raised an eyebrow. "Another woman?" "I was referring to some suspicious records I found, not just your name, but possibly others." "But you're saying you actually saw him with someone else?" Dahlia nodded, her hand shaking slightly as she set down her espresso cup. "He was so intimate with her, I wasn't sure what to think. But if what you're saying is true, we're both just part of a bigger pattern." A heavy silence descended as they both processed the scale of Leonard's betrayal. For Beatrice, it was more than heartbreak. It felt like an insult to the life she'd built, the trust she'd offered. For Dahlia, it was a savage blow to her pride and sense of self-worth. "What do you plan to do?" Dahlia asked, finally breaking the silence. Beatrice inhaled deeply. She thought of her wedding day, how Leonard had whisked her off to Venice on a private jet for their honeymoon, how he had knelt in street, Mark Square, to proclaim eternal devotion. Now, those memories tasted bitter. "I want evidence, legal, irrefutable proof that can protect me and expose him for the liar he is. Possibly, to divorce him in a way that ensures he can't slip away unscathed." Dahlia felt a surprising surge of empathy for Beatrice's resolve. She reached out, tentatively placing her hand over Beatrice's. "I can help. I know some of his secrets, how he arranges meetings, where he hides his personal documents. But let's be clear, this won't be easy. He's careful, powerful, and manipulative." A flicker of gratitude touched Beatrice's eyes. She squeezed Dahlia's hand gently. "We can do this if we work together. But we have to be smart. Step by step." Dahlia nodded. She recalled what Victoria Rains had said about Leonard's ability to twist loyalty. They would have to be methodical, gather real proof, and anticipate his counter-moves. More than anything, Dahlia wanted closure and a chance to restore her dignity, even if it meant helping the wife "I'm in," she said, voice firm. "What's our first move?" They talked for what felt like hours, mapping out a preliminary plan. Dahlia would share the contact details of the private suite Leonard frequently reserved, along with login credentials to certain booking apps he had asked her to use for them. Beatrice would speak with her family lawyer discreetly, ensuring that any evidence they gathered could be used in court, should it come to that. As they finally parted ways, there was a sense of unexpected camaraderie. They were two women scorned, forging an alliance born of betrayal and heartbreak. Each carried the weight of her own regrets. Yet, somehow, in that quiet corner of the cafe, they found the smallest glimmer of hope that justice, real justice, could be served. Outside, the night air felt crisper. Dahlia pulled her coat closer around her shoulders. Beatrice offered a small, wry smile. "I never thought I'd be saying this, but thank you for your honesty." Dahlia nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "We're in this together, for better or worse." The irony of that phrase did not escape them. For better or worse was something Leonard had promised Beatrice in front of all their friends and family. And now, ironically, it was a vow binding his wife and mistress to each other. Their separate cars departed from the lonely street, leaving behind the faint glow of the cafe's window. Neither woman fully understood the magnitude of the battle they were about to wage, but both felt an unspoken truth. They were done being victims in Leonard Harrington's twisted game. From here on out, they would be the architects of his downfall. In the days that followed their clandestine meeting, Beatrice and Dahlia embarked on a delicate dance of information gathering. They communicated through burner phones, disposable devices procured by Dahlia, who insisted they leave no digital trace that could be tied back to either of them. Trust was still precarious, though they had joined forces. Each woman carried her own apprehensions about fully letting the other in. The more they uncovered about Leonard, the more labyrinthine his life appeared. He had perfected the art of compartmentalizing his relationships. In emails and text messages, he used code words for rendezvous and business dealings alike, blurring the lines so thoroughly that any casual observer might never suspect foul play. However, Dahlia's intimate knowledge of these codes, combined with the leads in Leonard's black notebook, gave them a roadmap of leads to follow. Beatrice's first move was to consult a divorce attorney, a discreet professional named Martina Thorne, rumored to have handled high-profile cases involving top executives and celebrities. Martina had a reputation for protecting her clients' interests with ferocity. During their initial meeting, Beatrice laid out some of the suspicious financial documents she had found, cryptic mentions of offshore accounts and funneling money to unregistered companies. Martina's eyes glinted with keen interest as she flipped through the pages. "This is more than infidelity," Martina said, her tone measured. "If these documents are real, your husband could be facing serious legal trouble. Alimony and settlement negotiations might just be the tip of the iceberg." Beatrice's heart pounded as she recognized the magnitude of her revelations. She had only expected to prove Leonard's extramarital affair, but it seemed she might have stumbled upon evidence of potential financial crimes. Martina advised her to stay calm, continue collecting evidence, and avoid tipping Leonard off prematurely. This conversation left Beatrice both empowered and terrified. She wasn't just contending with a cheating spouse. She might be grappling with a man whose secrets could shake the foundations of his entire empire. Meanwhile, Dahlia leveraged her inside knowledge of Leonard's world. She reached out to certain associates, people in Leonard's orbit, who owed her favors or appreciated her professionalism enough to trust her with subtle bits of information. Over coffee breaks and casual after-work drinks, she gleaned small but critical pieces of intel, rumored shell companies linked to Leonard's name, hush money paid to a former employee, and mounting speculation that he was being investigated by a financial watchdog group. Yet, Dahlia's advantage came with risk. If Leonard discovered her inquiries, he might retaliate by blacklisting her within the industry or worse. With each question she asked, she walked a perilous tightrope, trying not to draw unwanted attention. She often felt a pang of anxiety gnawing at her chest, wondering if she had gone too far down a path from which there was no return. Late one evening, Beatrice and Dahlia convened via a secure call on their burner phones. They swapped updates. Dahlia rattled off the rumors she'd confirmed, while Beatrice disclosed her meeting with Martina. As they pieced their information together like a jigsaw puzzle, the full picture began to emerge. Leonard Harrington wasn't just cheating on his wife, he was playing a high-stakes game with fraudulent shell companies, misappropriated funds, and hush money to keep it all under wraps. For all we know, there could be more women, more payoffs. Beatrice speculated, a mixture of sorrow and anger coloring her voice. It's like he's built this entire web of lies to inflate his reputation and keep everyone around him controlled. Dahlia was silent for a moment, the gravity of the situation pressing down on her. I had no idea I was dealing with someone who might be a criminal, not just a cheater, she confessed. We have to be sure we use this information correctly. If we just confront him head-on, he'll deny everything and could threaten both of us. That's why we need more evidence, Beatrice replied resolutely. Martina said it needs to be airtight. And if there really is a formal investigation brewing, we need proof to either join it or leverage it to protect ourselves. In the midst of this surreptitious operation, Leonard remained oblivious. He spent his days at board meetings, dinners with potential investors, and photo ops that further showcased his philanthropic side, a charity gala here, a scholarship fund there. Smiling for the cameras, he perpetuated the myth of a perfect family man, an upstanding citizen of the high society circle. Behind that practiced grin, though, he sensed a shift in Beatrice's demeanor. She was quieter, more reserved. Now and then he caught her studying him with a careful, almost calculating stare. Whenever he asked if something was bothering her, she waved off his concerns with a dismissive shake of her head, masking her intent beneath a veneer of polite marital discourse. One evening, Leonard decided to surprise Beatrice with an ornate bouquet of roses, an unusually grand gesture. He handed them to her as she was heading to her art studio. "You've been preoccupied lately," he said, a touch of concern woven into his tone. "Something on your mind?" Beatrice forced a warm smile. "I've been busy, that's all," she replied, inhaling the sweet fragrance of the blooms. "Thank you for these." Her facade was convincing enough that Leonard didn't press the issue, but her heart pounded at the nearness of his presence, at how she was pulling the wool over the eyes of a man she once worshipped. She felt a flicker of triumph, overshadowed by a nagging guilt, but then she reminded herself that Leonard's own deceptions had forced her into this role. As the days ticked on, the two women discovered deeper threads of Leonard's deception. A hidden safe in his private office, secret investments under aliases, unaccounted for funds streaming between different accounts. Each new piece of information fueled their determination to bring him down. Yet, the real challenge lay ahead. They needed undeniable, incontrovertible proof, physical evidence of these transactions, recordings or messages that could withstand legal scrutiny. And they needed to secure it all before Leonard even suspected their alliance. Neither woman had anticipated that their partnership would become something more than a necessary inconvenience. Yet, a fragile sense of mutual respect began to bloom. They found in each other a strange comfort, an empathy that no one else in their circles could fully offer, because no one else knew the betrayal so intimately from both sides. Their bond was forged in hardship, and each day they inched closer to delivering a reckoning that Leonard Harrington would never see coming. The catalyst for the next phase of their plan arrived unexpectedly when Dahlia received a tip from one of her closest colleagues. He mentioned, almost in passing, that Leonard was planning a business retreat with potential investors at a remote luxury chalet. The property, dubbed Snow Peak Haven, was rumored to be owned by one of Leonard's shell companies. Dahlia sensed this retreat would be more than just a business meeting. In Leonard's world, it might serve as a clandestine hub for forging deals beyond the scrutiny of corporate boards. When Dahlia relayed this tip to Beatrice, the possibilities practically crackled through the phone line. They reasoned that if Leonard used the chalet for off-the-record transactions, it might hold a treasure trove of incriminating documents and digital footprints. This was exactly the type of place they needed to infiltrate. The risk was enormous, but so was the potential reward. "Are you up for it?" Dahlia asked cautiously. Beatrice's voice held a steely determination. "If it means nailing him to the wall, absolutely." They devised a bold strategy. Dahlia would find a pretext to join Leonard at the retreat as his assistant, feigning that her marketing expertise could impress the investors. Meanwhile, Beatrice would discreetly drive up after they'd arrived, using Dahlia's intel to slip into the chalet undetected. A labyrinth of challenges stood in their way: security staff, potential cameras, and the very real possibility of Leonard catching them. But the prospect of discovering critical evidence was too tempting to ignore. In the days leading up to the retreat, Dahlia feigned enthusiasm when Leonard mentioned he'd be traveling for a few days of business. She carefully planted seeds, emphasizing how her marketing insights could add value, how prospective investors might be swayed by a polished presentation. Leonard, eager to secure the deals, acquiesced, inviting her along. Beatrice, on her end, prepared a separate cover story for her own absence, telling Leonard she'd be visiting an old friend in the countryside for an art retreat. When the appointed day arrived, Dahlia boarded Leonard's private jet with a forced smile. The other attendees, two potential investors named Gilbert and Stone, plus a personal assistant to one of the investors, made polite conversation en route. Leonard relished his role as gracious host, topping off wine glasses and boasting about his long-term vision for a diversified portfolio. Dahlia played the supportive partner, taking mental notes of every subtlety, from the investors' demands to the hush-hush references to certain questionable projects. Snow Peak Haven was nestled among towering pine trees and rolling snow-capped hills. Its rustic facade belied the state-of-the-art amenities within. As they arrived, Dahlia's heart thumped. She was about to step onto the stage of their most daring act yet. Leonard gave Dahlia a quick tour, highlighting amenities like a private hot tub deck, high-end kitchen, and an expansive study adorned with antique books. "I'll need you to help prepare the conference materials," he said, gesturing to the study. "We'll meet the investors there tomorrow morning. Tonight, let's just unwind." Meanwhile, far down the winding roads, Beatrice drove a rented SUV with tinted windows. Snow flurries danced across her windshield as she navigated hairpin turns leading up the mountain. She wore simple, dark clothing, nothing that stood out. Adrenaline mingled with dread in her bloodstream. This was it. The moment she'd step into the lion's den, risking everything for the evidence that could finally free her from Leonard's manipulative grasp. Arriving under the cloak of dusk, Beatrice parked the SUV behind a cluster of pines, away from prying eyes. Using a small flashlight, she scanned the perimeter of the chalet, her breath condensing in the crisp air. Dahlia had texted her a rough sketch of the layout, including a back entrance that was rarely used. It led to a storage area and a set of stairs connecting to the main hallway. If all went as planned, Beatrice could slip in unnoticed while Dahlia kept Leonard occupied. Back inside the chalet, Dahlia approached Leonard, who was sipping an aged scotch by a stone fireplace. She feigned a headache, claiming she needed a moment to rest before dinner. "I'll be fresh by tomorrow," she assured him. "Might just lie down for a bit." Leonard, half absorbed in reviewing some papers, waved her off. "Sure, do what you need. We can join the others for a late dinner." Moments later, Dahlia quietly unlocked the back door, her heart hammering in her chest. Then she made her way to her suite, waiting for the signal that Beatrice had arrived. Her phone vibrated softly, a single text from Beatrice here. Dahlia slipped into the hallway, checking for any staff. Most of them were likely busy setting up for dinner or assisting the investors. She found Beatrice crouched by a shadowy corner near the stairs. Their eyes met, each filled with urgency and resolve. "This way," Dahlia whispered. "He's in the living room, drinking." They navigated the corridor, careful to muffle their footsteps on the wooden floor. Dahlia led Beatrice to the study, a sprawling room lined with old books and leather-bound folders. A massive wooden desk occupied the far end, a sleek laptop perched on top. The desk drawers and nearby cabinets called out to them like a siren song of secret knowledge. The clock was ticking. Leonard could wander in at any moment. Together, they searched methodically. Dahlia flipped through a stack of files, labeled with cryptic codes she recognized as project codenames. Beatrice navigated the laptop, entering the passwords Dahlia had gleaned from conversations with Leonard. Finally, they accessed a folder named Accounts, Priority. Inside were spreadsheets peppered with suspicious transactions, references to offshore entities, and multiple lines of direct payments disguised as consulting fees. Each line represented potential evidence not only of Leonard's financial misconduct, but also hush payments that might link back to personal affairs. "Yes," Beatrice hissed under her breath. She inserted a flash drive into the laptop, initiating a quick copy of the damning files. Meanwhile, Dahlia found a locked drawer. She rifled through Leonard's desk until she located a small key hidden under a fountain pen. Within the drawer sat a leather-bound ledger detailing movements of cash entries that cross-referenced the suspicious spreadsheets on the laptop. Footsteps sounded in the corridor. Both women froze, hearts thudding. The steps grew louder, paused momentarily outside the door, then receded. They exhaled in unison, resuming their scramble. In a matter of minutes, they had enough evidence to devastate Leonard's empire if revealed publicly or in court. Just as Beatrice ejected the flash drive, her phone buzzed a silent alarm she had set to remind them that they'd been in the study too long. With no time to lose, they returned the files to their original places, relocked the drawer, and closed the laptop. Slipping out through the same back corridor, they parted ways, Dahlia returning to her room to feign rest, and Beatrice retreating to the hidden SUV. She planned to leave immediately. Every second she stayed increased the chances of being discovered. None of it was easy. Their nerves were shot, adrenaline had them trembling, and they had taken a monumental gamble that could unravel the moment. Leonard noticed anything amiss. But as Beatrice drove down the mountain, the flash drive safely tucked inside her coat pocket, a sense of triumph warred with the haunting awareness that the real confrontation was yet to come. 2 days after the Snow Peak Haven heist, Leonard returned to the Harrington mansion, appearing victorious from his business retreat. He boasted about new deals in the works and seemed particularly pleased with himself, a smugness that Beatrice had grown to despise. She feigned mild interest, congratulating him without giving away any hint of the evidence burning a metaphorical hole in her possession. Behind the scenes, Beatrice and Dahlia felt a surge of confidence. They had incriminating files, receipts, and ledger copies that painted a devastating picture of Leonard's fraudulent dealings. Each woman also realized they needed to ensure this evidence was stored in multiple safe places. Beatrice locked a copy in a safety deposit box at a local bank under her maiden name, while Dahlia kept another in a secure cloud storage drive. They reasoned that if Leonard found out about one set, the other would remain hidden, ready to be revealed when the time was right. But gathering the evidence was only half the battle. The next step was deciding how and when to deploy it. Their priority was to protect themselves from Leonard's inevitable wrath. Beatrice's lawyer, Martina, advised caution. Pushing for an amicable separation might lull Leonard into complacency, opening the door for a more advantageous settlement. Simultaneously, they could quietly feed certain aspects of the financial misconduct evidence to the authorities, ensuring Leonard's potential indictment. For Dahlia, life became more complicated by the day. She couldn't simply vanish from Leonard's orbit without arousing suspicion. So she continued the charade, meeting him periodically under the guise of discussing marketing strategies. Each time he showered her with empty flattery, she forced herself to remember that justice was on its way. She no longer felt the old stirrings of affection or guilt. Instead, she saw him for what he truly was, a narcissistic manipulator who needed to be exposed. Tension mounted the day a private investigator showed up at Dahlia's apartment building, claiming to be working on behalf of an anonymous client. Dahlia peered at him through the security camera before deciding to ignore his visit. A pit of dread formed in her stomach, and she immediately warned Beatrice. "He might be testing to see if either of us is up to something," Dahlia said over the phone, her voice taut with anxiety. Beatrice's pulse quickened. "We have to stay vigilant. Don't let him rattle you. If we act guilty, he'll get suspicious." They agreed to tighten their communication protocols, again only speaking through burner phones, limiting face-to-face meetings to public places, and avoiding any direct references to the evidence in texts or emails. The closer they got to unmasking Leonard, the more precarious their situation felt. Around this time, Leonard planned a lavish anniversary party for him and Beatrice. Scheduled to take place at the family estate, a public spectacle to reaffirm his image of a perfect husband. The guest list included high-profile investors, socialites, and influential friends. Beatrice wanted to refuse outright, repulsed by the hypocrisy of it all. But Martina convinced her otherwise. "Attending this party without objection will make you seem unsuspecting. You'll gain insight into who's who in his circle. Trust me, it could be valuable." So Beatrice acquiesced. She prepared herself for a night of forced smiles and polite conversation. That evening, she emerged in an elegant midnight blue gown that accentuated her graceful figure. The staff scurried about, placing floral arrangements and ornate centerpieces in the grand ballroom. Soft violin music drifted through the corridors as champagne flutes were passed around on silver trays. From the moment the first guests arrived, Beatrice felt like an actress on a stage, reciting lines in a play she loathed. Leonard, wearing a tuxedo and his most charming grin, guided her around the room, introducing her to business associates and extolling her artistic brilliance. She could feel his hand on the small of her back, a gesture that once might have been intimate. Now it felt like a controlling grip. Dahlia arrived fashionably late, drawing curious glances. She wore a sleek, understated cocktail dress, her expression calm and collected. She knew exactly what she was doing, placing herself in Leonard's line of sight, making sure he believed she still craved his attention. Under the ambient glow of chandeliers, Dahlia caught Beatrice's eye. They exchanged the subtlest nod, a silent affirmation, "We're in this together." As the night wore on, the party's atmosphere felt increasingly surreal. Guests laughed and danced, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension. Leonard engaged in hushed conversations with potential investors in a corner of the ballroom. Meanwhile, Dahlia flitted between social circles, gleaning scraps of gossip. Beatrice, too, eavesdropped on pointed comments about Leonard's rumoured expansions and silent partners. Every now and then, she overheard a sideways glance or a whispered remark, an undercurrent of suspicion that Leonard's empire might not be as spotless as it seemed. For Beatrice, the highlight or low point came when Leonard took the microphone to toast their anniversary. He waxed poetic about how they'd grown together over the years, how she'd supported his dreams, and how he was the luckiest man alive. The applause felt like knives pricking her skin. She could practically hear the unspoken subtext. The audience believed in this charade, had come to witness the golden couple celebrate another year of wedded bliss. Yet, in the hushed corners of the room, Beatrice caught glimpses of snide smiles and half-raised eyebrows. She recognized jealousy, envy, or perhaps hidden knowledge swirling behind polished veneers. Maybe some in that crowd knew about the rumor mill that trailed Leonard. Perhaps others were too enamored by wealth to care. But she knew that soon, very soon, they would all learn the truth. When the clock struck midnight, staff began to clear empty champagne glasses, and the jubilant music started to wind down. Leonard appeared fatigued but satisfied, pulling Beatrice in for a staged embrace. With cameras flashing, Beatrice forced a dazzling smile, all the while thinking, "Just wait. Your illusions will crumble, and you won't see it coming." Exhausted, she retreated to their bedroom once the final guests left. As Leonard said his goodnights to the staff, Beatrice peeled off her party persona like a suffocating mask. She stood by the window, gazing at the moonlit lawn, her thoughts racing with anticipation and fear. Dahlia had texted her earlier in the evening some new information gleaned from overheard investor talk, but Beatrice was too drained to process it now. Tomorrow, she told herself, we tighten the noose a little more, and indeed the tides were turning. The evidence was amassed, the alliances made. Leonard had spent years weaving his web of lies. Now his wife and mistress were poised to rip it apart, strand by strand. Soon, his carefully constructed empire of deceit would face its greatest challenge yet, and no amount of money or charm would be enough to keep it from crumbling. Beatrice woke the next morning, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on her. The anniversary party had been a facade too excruciating to bear any longer. She recalled the hush of the crowd as Leonard poured his false adoration into a microphone. Even now, the memory made her stomach churn. From her art studio's window, she watched the sun pierce through the haze of early morning clouds. This sanctuary was the last place in the mansion that truly felt hers. Sketches, unfinished paintings, and easels cluttered the space, each representing a dream or emotion she could never fully articulate elsewhere. But she had no time for artistry this morning. Her mind was fixated on the next step in dismantling Leonard's illusions. She dialed Dahlia's burner phone. "It's time we move forward," Beatrice said the moment Dahlia picked up. "I agree," Dahlia replied, her voice steady. "I found out some new angles on those so-called partners. Seems they're not as innocent as they appear. They arranged to meet at a small lake house owned by a friend of Beatrice's family. Quiet, secluded, and far from Leonard's usual haunts. It was the perfect spot to strategize their next move. Dahlia arrived first, driving a nondescript sedan. She wore casual jeans and a jacket, her face devoid of the professional polish she maintained around Leonard. The air crackled with an almost electric tension when Beatrice joined her in the living room, where a faint smell of cedar wafted from the logs stacked by the fireplace. They spent hours reviewing the data on a laptop Dahlia had brought. The hush money entries, cross-referenced with ledger lines, outlined a complex but traceable web of offshore accounts. Transactions linking Leonard to shell corporations dotted the spreadsheets like landmines. Additionally, Dahlia relayed overheard conversations from the anniversary party, confirming that at least one investor, Jonathan Stone, seemed wary of Leonard's legal exposure. Stone had discreetly questioned Dahlia about whether Leonard's background was fully vetted. Beatrice tapped her foot anxiously. If one of his investors is already suspicious, it means Leonard's empire could collapse faster than we think. But we still need to be strategic about revealing this. Dahlia tilted her head, considering the ramifications. We can't just let him quietly fade away. He'll spin the narrative, pay people off. We need a knockout blow. At that moment, Beatrice's phone rang Martina, her lawyer. Beatrice answered, stepping onto the lake house porch for better reception. Martina's tone was brisk, yet excited. I've received word that a federal investigation is ramping up on some of the financial dealings linked to Leonard. This might be our window to share what we have, if we do it properly. You could secure immunity from any fallout and a strong legal standing in your divorce. Beatrice felt a rush of relief mingle with dread. Once the authorities got involved, there would be no turning back. The meltdown would be public, brutal, and irreversible. Still, she wanted Leonard to face consequences, not just for financial misdeeds, but also for his cruelty, manipulation, and personal betrayals. I'll bring the evidence, she told Martina. We'll do this by the book. After the call, she relayed the news to Dahlia. A tension-laced excitement coursed through both women. For Dahlia, it was a final chance to extricate herself from Leonard's shadowy world and salvage her career and reputation. For Beatrice, it was a necessary step to reclaim her life, end the marriage, and ensure Leonard's downfall was as complete as his lies had been. Yet they also recognized a potential danger. Leonard might catch wind of the investigation. If he did, he could move assets, threaten them, or orchestrate a smear campaign to discredit their evidence. They had to move quickly, meticulously. Their alliance solidified that day, sealed with the mutual understanding that they would not rest until Leonard was left with no escape. A chill wind swept across the lake as they packed up their materials. They parted with an unspoken vow. This is the calm before the storm. Back at the Harrington mansion, Beatrice maintained an air of practiced calm around Leonard, who appeared oblivious, engrossed in phone calls to his architects and business partners. I'm heading to the city for a few days, she told him during breakfast. There's an art expo, and I need new supplies. Leonard barely looked up from his phone. Sure, he mumbled. Enjoy. She could almost feel the tension in her chest unclench at his dismissive response. The distance gave her the freedom to finalize plans with Martina and Dahlia. Over the next few days, she delivered copies of the evidence to Martina's office, ensuring that the date stamps and spreadsheets were thoroughly reviewed. The lawyer's eyes widened at the scope of Leonard's wrongdoing. This is enough to bury him, Martina observed in a hushed tone. He could be facing multiple charges if the feds take it on. The final step was contacting an investigative journalist who had a reputation for exposing corporate corruption. Martina arranged a confidential meeting, explaining that while the journalist could break the story, they had to wait for the right moment after the legal framework was set in motion. The journalist, enthralled by the scandalous potential, agreed to keep everything off the record until Beatrice gave the green light. Unknown to Beatrice, Leonard's suspicion was growing. Despite his outward nonchalance, he had noticed a subtle change in Dahlia. Her phone calls were curt. Her once rapturous affection cooled. He also found the mansion's staff oddly tight-lipped, as if they were hiding something on her behalf. That sense of intangible shift prickled his senses. One evening, he confronted Dahlia via text. Leonard, you've been distant. Is there something you're not telling me? She carefully composed her response, feigning work stress. Dahlia, just swamped with a major campaign. Promise I'll make it up to you soon. Leonard stared at his phone, unconvinced. Over the years, He had honed a skill for reading the subtext of messages. Something felt off. Driven by paranoia, he hired the private investigator again, instructing him to tail Dahlia and see if she made any suspicious moves. "If she's meeting with anyone, I want to know who," Leonard insisted. The investigator, lured by generous pay, set about his job with zeal. The wheels were in motion for a climactic collision of truths and lies. Beatrice moved forward with legal motions that quietly signaled her intention to dissolve the marriage. Dahlia made arrangements to protect her professional reputation, even going so far as to gather email correspondences to prove she'd been manipulated by Leonard. Together, they forged a final plan. At the right moment, they would orchestrate a multi-pronged strike legal action, a coordinated media leak, and personal confrontation. Their greatest fear was that Leonard, in his final throes of desperation, might lash out violently or attempt to coerce them into silence. As cunning as he was, Dahlia suspected the looming investigation might drive him to extremes. Beatrice worried for her safety, and Martina advised her to consider a restraining order if things escalated. Through it all, the simmering bond between Beatrice and Dahlia deepened into something akin to sisterhood. They understood each other's wounds, regrets, and hopes in ways no one else could. Each had been scarred by Leonard's manipulations. Now, as the hours ticked down toward the moment they would tear his life apart, they clung to their collective resolve. Neither would allow him to continue his deception unchallenged. The mask was about to fall, and beneath it, Leonard's carefully constructed persona would be laid bare for the entire world to see. The night of reckoning arrived with a cold wind that rattled the windows of the Harrington estate. The tension was palpable in every corridor, every silent footstep echoing with unspoken resolve. Beatrice had requested that Leonard be home by 7 p.m. for an important announcement. She knew he couldn't resist an air of mystery, even if it came from his wife. Meanwhile, Dahlia, who was being tailed by Leonard's investigator, managed to slip away in a rented car to approach the estate's back entrance without detection. Martina and 2 associates waited discreetly in a parked SUV down the road, ready to file legal documents. The moment the confrontation concluded, the investigative journalist also stood by, ready to go public with the story at a moment's notice. Shortly after 7 p.m., Leonard strode through the front door. He wore an air of forced conviviality, as though anticipating some grand revelation that would further glorify his life. "Beatrice," he called out, shrugging off his coat, "what's this all about?" She emerged from the sitting room, dressed simply in black slacks and a white blouse. No makeup adorned her face. No jewelry sparkled at her wrists or ears. In this stark presentation, she felt anchored to her sense of purpose. "Come with me," she said, gesturing toward the study where sunlight had receded into the hush of dusk. Leonard frowned. "Is everything okay?" Beatrice said nothing, leading him into the room that once housed the black notebook revealing Dahlia's name. The moment they stepped in, Dahlia closed the door behind them. Leonard started, taking a step back. "Dahlia, what are you?" He glanced from one woman to the other, confusion morphing into suspicion and then alarm. Beatrice's heart pounded as she calmly hit play on a recording device. "We have some things we need to discuss," she said, her voice tightly controlled. Leonard's eyes flickered with anger. "A setup? What the hell is this?" "Precisely what it looks like," Dahlia replied, folding her arms. "We know about your affairs, plural, actually, and more importantly, we know about your shell companies, your fake transactions, and your hush money." For a moment, Leonard seemed disoriented, as if searching for a witty retort or a plausible lie. But the presence of both women standing in unity rattled him, his face contorted with indignation. "You think you can blackmail me?" he spat, his voice laced with contempt. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Beatrice produced a folder from a nearby table. "Actually, we do. This is a small fraction of the evidence we've gathered: bank statements, offshore records, ledger entries, all traced back to you. Leonard blanched for the briefest second before trying to regain composure. "This will never hold up in court," he sneered. "Everything can be explained as legitimate business deals." Dahlia stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "We have recorded calls, screenshots of your private emails, and corroboration from some of your so-called investors who suspect your empire is built on fraudulent deals. The feds are already interested, Leonard. If they haven't knocked on your door yet, they will soon." Desperation flared in Leonard's gaze, overshadowed by fury. "You think you two can ruin me? I'll bury both of you in lawsuits. I'll drag you through the courts until you have nothing left." Beatrice's hands trembled, but her voice remained steady. "That won't happen. Our lawyer is outside, ready to file a divorce petition citing your adultery and financial misconduct. I also have copies of all the incriminating data stored in multiple safe places. If anything happens to me or Dahlia, or if you try to muzzle us legally, the information goes public immediately." Leonard's control slipped further. He lunged toward Beatrice, but Dahlia stepped in front of him, anger radiating off her. "Don't you dare!" she hissed, her jaw clenched. He froze, unsettled by the fierce protectiveness between these two women he had once so easily manipulated. The silence that followed was electric. The illusions Leonard had woven for years cracked audibly in the dimly lit study. He glanced around as though seeking an escape route, but found none. "You'll be left with nothing," Beatrice said, her words slicing through the quiet. "All the prestige, the money, the admiration, it'll vanish. You did this to yourself." For a moment, Leonard's face twitched with something akin to regret, or perhaps the raw panic of a cornered predator. But he quickly replaced it with venom. "Fine," he spat. "Go ahead, do your worst. But don't think for a second I'll go down without a fight." Beatrice exchanged a somber look with Dahlia. They knew Leonard's threats weren't idle. This would be a battle, possibly a protracted legal war, but in that moment they also knew they held the upper hand. They had joined forces to pull the rug out from under him, methodically and thoroughly. "You've already lost," Dahlia said quietly, stepping aside to open the door. Leonard stood there, chest heaving with rage, eyes darting as though searching for a final gambit. Finding none, he stormed out of the study, ignoring Beatrice's attempts to hand him the folder of evidence. They heard the front door slam shut, the echo reverberating through the mansion's corridors like a final exclamation point on this confrontation. A trembling silence followed, and Beatrice found herself leaning against the study wall, trying to steady her breathing. Dahlia let out a long sigh, her hands shaking. They exchanged a glance of mutual relief and dread. The initial strike had landed, but the aftermath loomed large. Minutes later, Martina and her associates entered the mansion, quietly congratulating both women on their successful confrontation. "He's rattled," Martina observed. "We should file the divorce papers immediately. We've also informed federal investigators of the documents in our possession. This is a solid case." Dahlia peered through the study window, noticing Leonard's car roaring out of the driveway. She knew he would go on the offensive in some way, but for now, at least, they had seized control of the narrative. Beatrice turned to Dahlia, tears threatening to spill. "Thank you," she whispered. "I couldn't have done this alone." Dahlia squeezed her hand. "Nor could I. We had to stand together." And so, beneath the cloud-covered night sky, the first tumultuous wave of their plan crashed upon the fortress of Leonard's deceit. The final confrontation had taken place, but the true storm was just beginning. Legal battles, public scrutiny, and personal reckonings hovered on the horizon, waiting to strike. Yet for the first time, both women felt a fragile hope glimmering through the darkness, the possibility of a future no longer shackled by Leonard Harrington's insidious manipulations. Thank you for joining us on this journey of betrayal, unity, and ultimate vindication. Beatrice and Dahlia's alliance showed us how far determination and courage can go when people refuse to be pawns in a manipulator's game. By exposing Leonard Harrington's lies and standing side by side, these two women claimed their freedom and delivered a powerful lesson. No matter how intricate the web of deceit, truth can still unravel it thread by thread. If you found this story compelling, please take a moment to hit the like button and share it with friends who love a good tale of drama and justice. And if you'd like more stories that explore the depths of human emotion and resilience, be sure to subscribe to this channel. Your support helps us bring you more gripping narratives. Until next time, stay strong, stay vigilant, and stay true to yourself.
What pushes a woman to the absolute edge? For Chicago, it wasn't just the sting of betrayal from the man who promised her forever. It wasn't just the eviction notice on her door while she carried his child. It was the crushing silence, the cold realization that to him, she and their unborn son were a dirty secret to be erased. So when the city's elite gathered to celebrate millionaire Irene's birthday, she decided to give him a gift he couldn't refuse, delivered in front of the world. This is the story of how one woman, armed with nothing but the truth, gate-crashed the party of the year to serve a cold dish of revenge right on his birthday cake. The silence in Chicago's small fourth-floor walk-up apartment was a physical presence. It was heavier than the humid Saigon air that seeped through the louvered windows, thicker than the dust motes dancing in the single shaft of afternoon sun. Her gaze was fixed not on the vibrant street scene below, but on the crisp, cruel white of the eviction notice lying on her small wooden table. It was the third and final one. The words blurred, but their meaning screamed at her: failure, destitution, homelessness. Her hand rested instinctively on the firm, round swell of her belly, a silent promise to the life within that she would not let them fail. He was all she had left. Just 6 months ago, her world had been a kaleidoscope of impossible, brilliant colors. She was a gifted, if unknown, lacquer artist, struggling to make a name for herself in New York's burgeoning art scene. Her hands, usually stained with resin and shell powder, had found themselves held in the soft, manicured grip of Tristan Adrew. He was a titan of industry, a real estate mogul whose face graced the covers of business magazines, and whose family name was synonymous with dynastic wealth and power. He hadn't just walked into the small gallery showcasing her work. He had conquered it. Tristan didn't just see art. He saw potential assets and beauty he could possess. He bought her entire collection of 4 paintings, not with a sterile credit card, but with a gaze that made her feel more valuable than any piece on the wall. He had been utterly intoxicating. He'd spoken of her talent in a way that made her believe in herself, using words like visionary and prodigy. Their romance was a whirlwind, a fantasy plucked from a movie screen. He'd whisked her away from her cramped apartment to the penthouse suite of the landmark 81 tower, where the city sprawled beneath them like a carpet of scattered jewels. He'd introduced her to a world of bespoke tailoring 9-course meals and the casual, effortless confidence that only comes with obscene wealth. He loved her passion, he'd said, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about mixing traditional Cern Aurélie techniques with modern abstracts. He'd commissioned a massive piece for the lobby of his new flagship hotel, the Celestia Grand. It was to be her masterpiece, the project that would launch her career into the stratosphere. Chicago, who had spent her life guarding her heart, fell completely and irrevocably. She wasn't naive. She knew the chasm between their worlds was vast. But in his arms, under the soft glow of 1,000 city lights, he had made her believe they could build a bridge. He spoke of a future of a life where her art and his ambition would create a new legacy. He never spoke of marriage, not explicitly, but his promises were a silken web she had willingly wrapped herself in. The first crack in their perfect world was a thin blue line on a plastic stick. She was pregnant. Chicago had been terrified, but a secret, thrilling joy had bloomed in her chest. A child, a piece of him, a piece of her, a living, breathing symbol of their love. When she told him, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and excitement, his reaction was the first cold premonition of the end. There was no joy in his eyes. The warm, possessive gaze she adored was replaced by a cool, calculating assessment. The smile on his face was a strained, hollow thing. "Well," he'd said, his voice unnaturally level, "we'll have to handle this. Handle this." Chicago had repeated the beautiful bubble of her happiness, instantly bursting. He'd paced the length of the marble-floored penthouse, not looking at her. He spoke of his family, of expectations, of a 5-year business plan that was at a critical juncture. He mentioned a name she'd only seen in society pages, Isabel Lee, the daughter of a rival conglomerate's chairman. An important alliance, he'd called it. Not a romance, a merger. The conversation was a blur of corporate jargon and veiled dismissals. He told her not to worry, that he would take care of everything. The next day he was gone, on an urgent business trip to Singapore. The calls became shorter, the texts less frequent. Then they stopped altogether. The final fatal blow wasn't delivered by Tristan, but by a man in a tailored grey suit who introduced himself as Mr. Arlo, head of personal security for the Adru Corporation. He'd met her at a neutral cafe, his face impassive, his eyes holding a hint of what might have been pity or perhaps just professional detachment. He slid a bank-certified check across the table. It was for 5 billion Vietnamese dong, a staggering sum that was meant to buy her silence, her compliance, her disappearance. With it was a non-disclosure agreement, a thick legal document that would in essence erase her entire existence from Tristan's life. It stipulated that she could never contact him, his family, or his associates again. It forbade her from ever mentioning his name in connection with her or the situation. "Mr. Adru wishes you the best in your future endeavors." Mr. Arlo had said, his voice as sterile as the contract. "He believes this is the most dignified solution for everyone involved." Dignified. The word was a slap in the face. Chicago had stared at the check, a wave of nausea washing over her that had nothing to do with morning sickness. This was what she and her child were worth. A transaction. A problem to be solved with money. She had pushed the check and the papers back across the table, her hands shaking with a rage so profound it left no room for tears. "Tell him," she'd said, her voice low and dangerous, "that my child is not a business deal to be written off." Mr. Arlo had simply nodded, collected the documents, and left. The very next day, the commission for the Celestia Grand was cancelled, citing artistic differences. The gallery that had once championed her work suddenly had no space for her pieces. Her calls to Tristan's personal number went to a disconnected line. She had been excised from his life with surgical precision. Now, 3 months later, the money she had saved was gone, eaten away by rent, living expenses, and the initial doctor's visits for the baby. The eviction notice was the final proof of her utter isolation. Tristan hadn't just abandoned her. He had systematically dismantled her life, ensuring she had no foundation from which to fight back. As she stood there feeling the baby kick, a new feeling began to eclipse the despair. It was a hard, cold, and diamond-sharp resolve. He thought he could erase her. He thought money and power could silence the truth. But the truth was growing inside her, a living, breathing testament to his lies. He wanted a dignified solution. Fine. She would give him one. But it wouldn't be silent, and it wouldn't be private. It would be a spectacle. Her eyes fell upon a glossy magazine discarded on a nearby stool. The cover featured Tristan and a beautiful, poised woman, Isabel Lay. The headline read, "Billionaire Heir, Tristan Adrew's Extravagant 35th Birthday Gala." The society event of the year at the Reverie Saigon. A plan desperate and terrifying began to form in her mind. Tristan was building a fortress around his perfect life. She would not just knock on the door. She would become the Trojan horse walk straight through the gates and burn it all down from the inside. The decision once made settled in Chicago's soul like a block of ice. It chilled her fear, numbing the part of her that screamed about the risks, the humiliation, the sheer audacity of what she was about to do. Desperation was a powerful forge, and in it her shame was hammered into a weapon. Her first move was strategic. Fighting the Adrew family in a legal battle would be suicide. Their lawyers would bury her in motions and drain her of resources she didn't have. They would paint her as a gold-digging opportunist, and in the court of public opinion controlled by their vast media influence, she would be convicted before she ever spoke a word. No, her weapon couldn't be a lawsuit. It had to be undeniable, irrefutable, biological truth. With the last of her meaningful savings, a small fund she'd kept from a pre-Tristan commission, she made an appointment at a private international clinic. She paid for the most advanced, non-invasive prenatal paternity test. It required only a blood sample from her, and crucially, a discrete sample from the alleged father. This was her first major hurdle. Tristan was a phantom insulated by layers of security and wealth. But she remembered something. During their time together, he'd been an avid, almost obsessive golfer. He had a weekly game at the Tan Son Nhat golf course, a sanctuary for the city's elite. He also had a habit. After every game, he would drink a specific brand of imported electrolyte water, crushing the plastic bottle with a single aggressive twist of his hand, before tossing it into the bin next to the clubhouse shoe shine station. It was a small, arrogant display of strength. She called her only friend Aurelie. Aurelie was a pragmatist, a scooter-riding, street-smart accountant who had viewed Chicago's relationship with Tristan with deep suspicion from the start. "You want to do what?" Aurelie shrieked over the phone. "Go dumpster diving for a billionaire's backwash. Chicago, this is insane. He'll have you arrested for stalking and he won't even know I'm there." Chicago argued, her voice firm. "I just need the bottle, Aurelie. It's the only way." It took a week of convincing, but Aurelie, seeing the dark-rimmed desperation in her friend's eyes and the unyielding set of her jaw, finally agreed. The mission was absurdly tense. The two women, looking hopelessly out of place, loitered near the service entrance of the golf course. Chicago, now noticeably pregnant, stayed in the grab car, while Aurelie, feigning a lost tourist, managed to get close to the clubhouse. She watched as Tristan and his cohort finished their game, laughing and clapping each other on the back. She saw him drain the bottle of water and toss it exactly as Chicago had described, with her heart hammering. Aurelie waited until the group moved inside, then casually strolled over to the bin, dropped a napkin into it, and in the same motion retrieved the crushed plastic bottle. She was back in the car in less than 2 minutes, her face pale but triumphant. "If we get arrested, I'm blaming your unborn child's hormones," O'Reilly panted, holding up the bottle like a holy relic. Chicago almost cried with relief. She carefully placed the bottle into a sterile bag. The next day, she dropped it off at the clinic. The lab technician, a professional and discreet woman, promised the results in 7 business days. An eoralial, she said, with a password-protected PDF attachment. 7 days. Chicago felt like a soldier waiting for a signal. In that time, she focused on the second phase of her plan infiltration. The Reverie Saigon was not just a hotel. It was a fortress of luxury, a vertical palace in the heart of District 1. The guest list for Tristan's gala would be scrutinized, the security airtight. Walking in the front door was impossible. Her mind raced back through the details Tristan had so proudly shared with her. He had boasted about the hotel's exclusivity, the Michelin-starred chefs, the bespoke event planning. And then she remembered it, a small detail he'd mentioned. The gala's catering wasn't being handled by the hotel's Auralien kitchen, but by an external high-end catering company called L'Art de la Fête to accommodate a uniquely complex menu. This was her way in. Using a public computer at an internet cafe, she researched the company. They were hiring, not for chefs or managers, but for temporary event staff, servers, bussers, kitchen hands, the invisible army required to make such an event run smoothly. The pay was low, the hours were long, and the turnover was high. Perfect. She created a new sparse resume under a different name, Lynn, claiming previous waitressing experience at a mid-range restaurant that had recently closed down. She knew the risks. A background check could expose her, but she gambled on the likelihood that for a temporary low-level position, the company's HR would do the bare minimum. She was right. She got a call 2 days later. After a brief, perfunctory phone interview, she was told she had the job. Her shift was for Tristan's birthday gala. She was to report to the service entrance of the Reverie Saigon at 4 p.m. sharp. Uniform would be provided. "You're going to try and work a 10-hour shift as a waitress while 7 months pregnant?" O'Reilly asked, her voice a mixture of awe and terror. "Chicago. Your feet will swell. You'll be exhausted. What if you drop something? What if someone recognizes you?" "They won't be looking for me amongst the serving staff," Chicago said, her voice steely. "The rich are experts at looking past the people who serve them. To them, I'll be invisible, and that's exactly what I need." The day before the gala, the eoralial arrived. Her hands trembled as she typed the password "Son vous," a silly portmanteau of their names she had created in happier times. The irony was a bitter pill. The PDF loaded. Her eyes scanned past the legal jargon and laboratory accreditation seals, fixing on the final conclusive table. Analysis of submitted DNA samples. Alleged. Father Tristan, Adru sample from discarded item. Fetus. Sample from maternal blood. Result. The probability of paternity is 99.999%. Chicago stared at the numbers until they burned into her retina. 99.9999%. A near-perfect certainty. It was the truth, codified and certified. It was her bomb. Now how to detonate it. Simply handing him the paper felt anticlimactic. Shouting it would be dismissed as hysterics. She needed a medium that was as grand and public as his betrayal. The centerpiece of any birthday party is the cake. Tristan's, she knew, would be an ostentatious, multi-tiered monstrosity, a monument to his own ego. That would be her canvas, her plan solidified. She found a specialty bakery that printed custom images onto edible frosting sheets. She took a screenshot of the most crucial part of the DNA report, the header, the names, and the final damning percentage. She eoraliled it to the shop, paying online and arranging for Aurelie to pick it up. An edible DNA result, Aurelie said, her voice flat with disbelief when she arrived with the printed sugar sheet, sealed in a flat cardboard envelope. You are truly a terrifying artist, my friend. Chicago took the envelope. It felt heavier than it should, weighted with the gravity of her intent. She now had the proof, the means of entry, and the method of delivery. All that was left was to walk into the lion's den. As she folded the simple black pants and white shirt of her uniform, she felt a profound and terrifying calm. She was no longer just Chicago, the heartbroken artist. She was a mother on a mission, and hell hath no fury like a woman fighting for her child. The service entrance of the Reverie Saigon was a world away from the opulent gold-leafed lobby that greeted its wealthy guests. Here in the concrete belly of the beast, the air was thick with the smell of industrial cleaner and cooking oil. It was a chaotic ballet of clattering trolleys, shouting chefs, and scurrying staff in functional sweat-wicking uniforms. Chicago, dressed in her simple black and white server's attire, blended in perfectly. The anonymity she had craved was now her shield. Her baby chose that moment to perform a series of energetic kicks, as if sensing the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Chicago placed a hand on her stomach, a silent reassurance. We can do this. Just a few more hours. The catering manager, a perpetually stressed-looking woman named Mrs. Quyen, barely glanced at her. She thrust a tray of champagne flutes into Chicago's hands. Ballroom A, Oralian floor. Stick to the perimeter. Keep the glasses full. Don't engage with the guests unless spoken to. And for God's sake, don't drop anything. Carrying the tray was a challenge. Her lower back ached in protest, and her center of gravity was unfamiliar. But the physical discomfort was a welcome distraction from the storm raging in her mind. With every step she took through the swinging doors and into the grand ballroom, she felt like she was crossing a threshold into another dimension. The sheer scale of the opulence was breathtaking and nauseating. The room was a symphony of crystal gold and white orchids. A string quartet played softly in one corner, while the city's most powerful and beautiful people mingled their laughter like the clinking of ice in expensive crystal. They were peacocks in their natural habitat, draped in designer gowns and bespoke suits, their wrists he-Daniel, with watches that cost more than her parents' house. And there in the center of it all was him. Tristan Adrew was holding court, a magnetic sun around which all other bodies orbited. He looked impossibly handsome in a dark velvet tuxedo, a confident, easy smile on his face. At his side, her hand possessively on his arm, was Isabelle Le. She was stunning, a porcelain doll in a shimmering emerald gown that perfectly matched the massive rock on her left ring finger. An engagement ring. The sight of it was a physical blow, knocking the air from Chicago's lungs. The tabloids had speculated, but this was confirmation. He had replaced her, formalized his alliance, and built his future on the ashes of their past. Chicago forced herself to move, to melt into the background as she'd been instructed. She moved along the edges of the room, her eyes scanning, observing. She was a ghost at this feast, Pridaniel. To the whispers and secrets hidden behind the glittering facade. The La Family merger is a brilliant move, a portly man with a cigar said to his companion. It solidifies the Adrew Empire for the next generation. Tristan is ruthless, the other man replied with a chuckle. Did you hear what he did to that small developer in Da Nang, bought the land right out from under him, and bled him dry in court? The man lost everything." Chicago's blood ran cold. This was the man she had loved. The man who had quoted poetry to her and praised the delicate grace of her brushstrokes. She was just another small developer to him, someone to be bled dry and discarded when she became an inconvenience. Her resolve hardened into granite. An hour into her shift, her feet were screaming. She found a momentary refuge in a small alcove behind a pillar, catching her breath. From here she had a clear view of the stage, where a jazz band was now playing. She also saw Mr. Arlo Tristan's head of security, his hawkish eyes sweeping the room with practiced vigilance. He was a walking symbol of the wall she had to breach. Their eyes met for a fleeting second. Chicago's heart leaped into her throat. She immediately looked down, busying herself with rearranging the glasses on her tray, making herself small and insignificant. He looked away, his gaze passing over her, without a flicker of recognition. She was just part of the furniture. The relief was so intense it made her dizzy. The evening wore on. Speeches were made. Tristan's father, a formidable old patriarch, with eyes as cold and hard as diamonds, spoke of legacy power and the bright future of the Adru-Lee alliance. He never once smiled. Then Isabel took the microphone. Her voice was smooth and cultured, but her words were daggers in Chicago's heart. "To my darling Tristan," she began, raising her glass, "the most driven, ambitious, and brilliant man I have ever known. He knows what he wants, and he is never afraid to do what is necessary to achieve it. He is building an empire, and I am so honored to be by his side as his future wife, to build a family and a dynasty that will last for centuries. Happy birthday, my love." The crowd erupted in applause. Tristan kissed Isabel, a performative public sealing of their contract. Chicago felt a tear of pure rage slide down her cheek. Family dynasty. What about the family he had already started? The one growing in her womb, a life he was actively trying to pretend didn't exist. That was it. The last shred of her hesitation vanished. Her chance came when Mrs. Quien's frantic voice crackled over the small earpiece given to the staff. "Cake prep. I need 2 people in the West Corridor pantry now. The Oralian cake is coming up." Chicago moved instantly. She deposited her tray on a nearby service stand and hurried towards the designated corridor, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This was her moment. The pantry was a small stainless steel room bustling with activity. And there it was, the cake. It was an architectural marvel, 5 tiers of perfect white fondant, adorned with intricate sugar work and delicate handcrafted gold leaf. It was a monument to wealth and ego, a pristine canvas. "You, Lynn," Mrs. Quien barked, pointing at Chicago. "Stand by. Once it's rolled out, your job is to stand with the pastry chef and hand him the ceremonial knife. Do not mess this up." Her hands were shaking as she took her position. The pastry chef, a proud, fussy man, was making last-minute adjustments. This was her window. The others in the pantry were focused on loading dessert trolleys. The chef was obsessed with his creation. No one was looking at her. With trembling fingers, Chicago reached into the inner pocket of her apron. She pulled out the flat cardboard envelope Aurelie had given her. Her hands were slick with sweat as she carefully slid out the edible frosting sheet. It was cool and slightly stiff. The black letters on the white sugar paper screamed up at her. Probability of paternity, 99.999%. The band in the ballroom struck up a familiar tune. "Happy birthday." The time was now. The chef gave a satisfied nod, and 2 waiters began to wheel the massive cake trolley towards the ballroom doors. Chicago fell into step beside them, the ceremonial knife on a small silver platter in one hand, the frosting sheet concealed in the other. As they pushed through the doors, a wave of applause and cheers washed over them. The lights in the ballroom dimmed and spotlights converged on the cake on Tristan and Isabel, who stood beaming beside it. Chicago's world narrowed to a tunnel. All she saw was Tristan's smiling face, a mask of happy ignorance. The voices of the crowd singing his praises faded into a dull roar. Her own heartbeat was the only sound she could hear. He did this, she thought, her steps firm, her purpose absolute. He made this necessary. They reached the center of the room. The pastry chef took his bow. Chicago stepped forward, holding the platter with the knife. Tristan turned to her, his eyes briefly flicking over her face. The server, the anonymous functionary. For a terrifying half-second, she thought she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Confusion. A ghost of a memory. But it was gone as quickly as it came. He reached for the knife, but Chicago didn't offer it to him. In one swift, deliberate movement, she dropped the knife. It clattered loudly onto the polished floor, the sound shockingly loud in the momentary silence after the song. Every eye flew to her, and in that sliver of time, that gasp of collective surprise, she acted. Before security could move, before Tristan could process what was happening, she took the edible DNA result, and with a movement that was both furious and precise, she unrolled it and slapped it down right across the pristine top tier of his magnificent birthday cake. The sugar sheet lay starkly against the white fondant. The bold black letters were unmistakable in the glare of the spotlights. Paternity test results alleged. Father Tristan. Adru. Probability of paternity 99%. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. The silence that followed was more profound, more explosive than any noise. It was the sound of a perfectly constructed world shattering into a million pieces. For a long, stretched-out moment, the universe seemed to hold its breath. The only movement was the slight quiver of the sugar paper on the cake as the air conditioning whispered over it. The spotlights intended to illuminate a moment of celebration now served as a harsh interrogation lamp, pinning Tristan in their glare. His smile was frozen on his face, a grotesque rictus of shock. His eyes, wet and disbelieving, were fixed on the black and white declaration that had desecrated his perfect cake. Chicago stood her ground, her chin held high, her hand instinctively going to her belly. The fear she had anticipated was absent, replaced by an icy, empowering calm. She had thrown the bomb. Now she would watch it explode. Isabel was the first to react. Her perfectly painted lips parted in a silent "oh" of horror. Her eyes darted from the cake to Chicago, and a flicker of ugly recognition dawned in her expression. This was not just a random crazy person. This was a ghost from Tristan's past she had likely been assured was long gone. A low murmur rippled through the crowd, quickly swelling into a cacophony of frantic whispers, gasps, and the unmistakable clicking of phone cameras. The city's elite, so practiced in their poise, devolved into a mob of scandal-hungry gossips. This was juicier than any business merger, more shocking than any market fluctuation. This was real, raw human drama, and they were devouring it. Tristan finally broke his paralysis. His face, which had been pale with shock, was now flooding with a dark, furious red. His eyes lifted from the cake and locked onto Chicago's. The love she had once seen in them was replaced with a venomous hatred, so pure it was almost breathtaking. "What is the meaning of this?" he snarled, his voice low and shaking with rage, yet carrying across the suddenly silent ballroom. "Who are you, security?" But Chicago spoke before security could reach her. Her voice wasn't a scream. It was clear, steady, and laden with the weight of months of pain. It cut through the noise like a shard of glass. "You know exactly who I am, Tristan," she said, her gaze unwavering. She took a small step closer, a gesture of defiance. "I'm the woman whose life you tried to erase with a check. The artist whose career you destroyed because she became an inconvenience." Her eyes flickered to Isabel, whose face was now a mask of cold fury. "He told me your engagement was just an important alliance, a merger. It seems he tells everyone what they want to hear." "Lies," Isabel hissed, finding her voice. "She's a liar, Tristan. Get this trash out of here." But the proof was sitting on the cake, 99.999%. The number pulsed in the air, undeniable. "Happy birthday, Tristan," Chicago continued, her voice ringing with a chilling finality. "I didn't have 5 billion dong to buy you a gift, but I thought you should have this. The one thing you can't buy or sell or bully into disappearing." She pointed at the cake, then placed her hand firmly back on her stomach. "This is your son. Meet your legacy." The word son was the final detonation. Chaos erupted. Tristan's father, the patriarch, looked as though he might have a stroke, his face purple with rage. He was shouting at Mr. Arlo, who was finally pushing his way through the stunned crowd. Isabel let out a strangled sob of fury and humiliation, turning on Tristan. "You told me she was nobody," she shrieked, her carefully crafted composure shattering completely. "You swore it was over, that it was handled. You let me stand up there and talk about our future, our family, while this was waiting." She ripped the enormous emerald ring from her finger and hurled it at his chest. It bounced off his velvet jacket and skittered across the floor. Forgotten. Tristan flinched as if he'd been struck. He was being attacked from all sides. His fiancée, his father, 100 pairs of judging eyes, and the calm, resolute gaze of the woman he had wronged. He was trapped, humiliated on the grandest stage he had ever built for himself. Mr. Arlo and another guard finally reached Chicago. They took her arms, their grip firm, but not brutal. They had failed in their duty to prevent the disaster, and now they were just doing damage control. Chicago didn't struggle. She had accomplished her mission. She held her head high as they escorted her through the gawking crowd. She could feel their stares, hear their whispers, a mixture of pity, contempt, and grudging admiration. As they passed the Adru family, she met the patriarch's eyes. The look he gave her was one of pure, unadulterated loathing. He saw her not as a person, but as a wrecker of dynasties. Her last sight as they pushed her through the service doors was of Tristan standing alone amidst the ruins of his party. His fists were clenched, his face a maelstrom of shame and fury. The magnificent cake, his symbol of success, was now a monument to his public disgrace, forever marked by the truth. Back in the concrete corridor, the noise of the party faded, replaced by the sterile hum of the service area. Mr. Arlo led her to a quiet corner, his face grim. "Was it worth it?" he asked, his voice low. It wasn't an accusation, but a genuine question. Chicago looked at him, the man who had delivered the severance check, the loyal soldier of the man who had betrayed her. She thought of the eviction notice, the lonely nights, the fear for her child's future. Then she thought of the look on Tristan's face, the shattering of his arrogance. "You gave me a check to solve a problem, Mr. Arlo," she said, her voice steady. "I just chose a different method of payment. He will acknowledge our son now." Yes, it was worth it. He simply nodded slowly, a complex expression on his face. He escorted her to the exit, not as a criminal, but as someone who had won a war he hadn't understood he was fighting in. As she stepped out into the humid night air, the cool breeze on her face felt like freedom. She hadn't just gate-crashed a party. She had reclaimed her story. The sound of sirens in the distance was growing, but she wasn't afraid. The explosion was over. Now came the fallout. The explosion had been deafening, a spectacle of public humiliation that had brought a dynasty to its knees. But the aftermath, Chicago discovered, was a strange and echoing silence. The taxi ride from the gilded prison of the Reverie Saigon back to her fourth-floor walk-up felt like traversing dimensions. The adrenaline that had turned her spine to steel began to dissolve, leaving a profound, bone-deep weariness in its place. Each bump in the road, each traffic light was a jolt back to a reality she had just irrevocably altered. She paid the driver with trembling hands, her key fumbling at the lock to her building as if it belonged to a stranger. Inside her apartment, the silence she had left behind hours ago rushed back in to greet her. But it was different now. It was no longer the He-Daniel silence of despair, but the electric humming silence of a world holding its breath. She sank onto her lumpy sofa, her body finally succumbing to the immense strain, and laid a protective hand on her belly. "We did it, little one. We made them listen." Her first call was to Aurelie. Her friend picked up on the first ring. "Chicago. I've been calling you 100 times. Turn on your phone. The internet it's on fire. Are you okay? Where are you?" "I'm home," Chicago said, her voice raspy. "I'm safe." 20 minutes later, Aurelie burst through the door, her face a mask of terror, awe, and manic excitement. She held up her phone, the screen glowing with dozens of notifications. "You're everywhere. #Tran View Cake Scandal. Billionaire baby bomb. They're calling you the angel of justice on some forums and a vengeful homewrecker on others. Oh, Chicago, you actually did it." Together they huddled in the dim light of the apartment, watching the story unfold on Aurelie's phone. Grainy footage, shot from a dozen different angles, showed it all her calm approach. The clatter of the dropped knife, the slap of the edible paper onto the pristine cake. They watched Isabel's shriek, the thrown ring skittering across the floor, the apoplectic rage on the face of Tristan's father. It felt surreal, like watching a movie of someone else's life. The woman on the screen looked so fearless, so certain. Chicago didn't feel fearless now. She felt fragile, exposed, and terrifyingly alone. Meanwhile, in the ruined grand ballroom of the Reverie, Tristan Adru was living through the longest 10 minutes of his life. The moment Chicago was escorted out, the dam of polite society broke. His father, the formidable Chairman Tran, had grabbed his arm in a vice-like grip, his knuckles white. "You fool," the old man had hissed, his voice a low growl of pure fury, shielded from the nearest guests by a wall of security. "You arrogant, careless fool, I warned you about fraternizing with nobodies. I told you to handle it. A check wasn't enough for this one, was it? You let a piece of street trash humiliate this family and sink a 50 trillion dong alliance." Isabel's parents, the Lee family, were already being ushered out a side exit by their own security, their faces carved from ice. Mr. Lair had given Tristan a single look of utter contempt that was more devastating than any blow. The merger, the 5-year plan, the dynasty. It was all ash. Tristan stood there mute as his father berated him. The insults washed over him, meaningless noise against the roaring in his ears. All he could see was the look in Chicago's eyes. It wasn't the look of a gold digger. It was the look of a woman with nothing left to lose. A woman he had pushed into a corner until she had no choice but to bite. He had underestimated her, not just her resolve, but the depth of the wound he had inflicted. And in front of his entire world, she had shown him the cost. The following days were a state of siege. A swarm of reporters and paparazzi descended upon Chicago's building, their long-lensed cameras pointed at her windows like sniper rifles. She became a prisoner in her own home, the flashes of cameras punctuating her nights. O'Reilly became her lifeline, her provisioner, her fierce guardian at the gate, fending off reporters with a string of creative and highly effective insults. The Adru Corporation enacted a strategy of absolute silence. Their PR machine, usually so quick to spin any negative press, was dormant. It was a calculated move Chicago knew. They were waiting, letting the initial emotional furor die down, hoping the public would grow bored. They were likely digging into her past, searching for any scrap of dirt they could use to discredit her when they finally launched their counterattack. The silence was not peace. It was the drawing back of a catapult. In the solitude of her apartment, with the noise of the world buzzing outside Chicago, had moments of crippling doubt. Had she gone too far? Had she ruined her child's life before it had even begun by making him the center of a public scandal? She would pace the small floor, her hands twisting in her lap, the weight of her actions pressing down on her. But then the baby would kick a small, strong, insistent reminder of why she had done it. She had done it for him. To give him a name, a truth, a future that wasn't dependent on a secret shame. And with that thought, her resolve would harden once more. The turning point arrived exactly 1 week after the gala. It wasn't a process server with a lawsuit, but a sleek professional courier delivering a thick cream-colored envelope. Orally, who had intercepted it downstairs, held it as if it were radioactive. "It's from Vaux and Associates," she whispered, her eyes wide. "They're the Sharks, Chicago. The most expensive, most ruthless corporate lawyers in the country. This is it." Chicago's blood ran cold. With trembling fingers, she opened the envelope. But the letter inside was not the declaration of war she expected. It was an offer of alliance, a shield. It offered the firm's full pro bono services to secure her and her child's future, funded by an anonymous client with a vested interest in the well-being of the next generation of the Adru family. "It's a trap," Aurelie said instantly. "A rival of Tristan's wanting to use you and the baby as a pawn in their corporate games." But Chicago wasn't so sure. She thought of the dynamics she had witnessed. A domineering patriarch, a son who was both a prince and a prisoner, and a mother who was perpetually, silently in the background. Who else would care about the well-being of a Adru grandchild with such fierce anonymity? Her hunch was confirmed at her first meeting with the head of the firm's family law division. A woman named Miss Daniel was a force of nature in a silk suit. Her office, overlooking the city from a high floor, was minimalist and immaculate. She exuded an aura of calm, lethal competence. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. The Adru family's primary strategy would have been to paint you as an unstable, blackmailing gold digger. Ms. Daniel stated, her voice crisp. They would have buried you in legal fees, subpoenaed your friends, Your family, your elementary school records, looking for any inconsistency to destroy your credibility. They expected you to be alone and scared. They did not expect you to have assault. Daniel then explained that their anonymous benefactor had watched the rise of Chairman Tran for 30 years, had seen his ruthlessness poison his own son and corrupt the family's name. The scandal was not just a crisis, but an opportunity. An opportunity to introduce a new variable into the Adru equation, one that the chairman couldn't control. A grandson whose rights were protected by ironclad law, not by the whims of a tyrant. Then she slid a small, simple handwritten note across the polished desk. Our client asked me to give you this personally. The handwriting was an elegant feminine script. My husband only understands power. You have shown him what it is. Now let us secure my grandson's future. It was unsigned, but it was everything. Tristan's mother, the silent queen of the Adru dynasty, had chosen her side. Chicago felt a wave of emotion so powerful it almost buckled her. She was not alone. In the heart of her enemy's fortress, she had found the most powerful ally imaginable. With the backing of Vaux and Associates, the entire dynamic shifted. Ms. Daniel made the first move, sending a single polite letter to the Adru legal team, requesting a meeting to formalize the paternity and establish a comprehensive support agreement for the child. The letter was a masterpiece of understated threat, its subtext clear. We have the proof, we have the resources, and we have the will. You can do this the easy way, or you can do this the bloody way in front of every news camera in Asia. The response was immediate. Tristan agreed to a meeting. It took place in a neutral conference room at Ms. Daniel's firm. Chicago, dressed in a simple but dignified maternity dress, felt a sense of calm control she hadn't felt in months. When Tristan walked in, flanked by his own stone-faced lawyer, she barely recognized him. The swagger was gone. The charismatic aura had collapsed inward. He looked tired, defeated, and haunted. He sat opposite her, his gaze fixed on the grain of the wood table, unable to meet her eyes. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. It was the same question from that first day, but this time it was not a dismissal, but a plea. Chicago took a breath, Ms. Daniel a silent, reassuring presence beside her. "I want you to know, Tristan," she began, her voice soft but clear, "that I did love you. I believed in the future you sold me. When you threw me away, you didn't just break my heart. You tried to negate my existence and that of our child. The gala wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of survival. It was the only way to make you see us." His lawyer started to speak, but Tristan raised a hand, silencing him. He finally looked up, and in his eyes she saw not anger, but a deep, cavernous shame. Ms. Daniel took over her tone all business. She laid out the terms not as requests, but as non-negotiable conditions. First, the creation of the Farah Trust, an independently managed irrevocable fund for their son that would make him financially independent for life. Second, Tristan's immediate and public acknowledgement of paternity. His lawyer nodded. These terms were expected, but the final demand was the one that landed like a physical blow. Furthermore, Ms. Daniel stated, her eyes fixed on Tristan, Ms. Chicago will retain sole and full legal and physical custody of their son. You will have no automatic parental rights. Tristan's head snapped up. "No," he said, the first spark of his old fire returning. "He is my son. I have a right you abdicated when you sent Mr. Arlo with a severance check." Chicago cut in her voice, unwavering. This isn't to punish you, Tristan. It is to protect him. I will not have my son raised in the shadow of your father. I will not have him taught that love is a transaction and loyalty is a commodity. He will be raised with compassion and integrity. He will know his father if and when he chooses to, and only if you prove yourself to be a positive presence in his life. His connection to you will be a choice, not a chain. The fight drained out of him as quickly as it had appeared. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and perhaps for the first time he saw the woman he had wronged not as a problem, but as a mother protecting her child from the very world that had broken him. He slumped in his chair and gave a single defeated nod. The contracts were signed. The war was over. In the following weeks, Chicago's life transformed. She moved into a bright, spacious apartment in a secure building a world away from the precarious walk-up. The first major deposit into her bank account wasn't from Tristan, but from a gallery in Singapore which had purchased her entire back catalogue for an astonishing sum, brokered by a private art consultant who was undoubtedly Miss Daniel. The story attached to her name, the scandal that was meant to destroy her, had instead made her one of the most talked-about artists in Southeast Asia. 3 months later, she gave birth to a beautiful, healthy boy. She held him in her arms, marveling at his tiny, perfect fingers. She named him Kien, persistent, strong, a promise. Her days found a new, peaceful rhythm, the rhythm of feeding and sleeping of a baby's first smile. In her sunlit studio, she began to paint again, not with the desperation of before, but with a newfound power. Her canvases were bold, filled with color and life-telling stories of resilience and hope. Her masterpiece was a large lacquer panel titled The Unveiling, a swirling abstract of gold leaf and crushed eggshell on a black background, suggesting a single defiant truth shining in an overwhelming darkness. It was the story of her life, and it was the most honest thing she had ever created. One afternoon, as Kien slept peacefully in a bassinet beside her, Chicago stood before her work, a dab of paint on her cheek. She thought of the man in the velvet tuxedo, the magnificent cake, and the world she had set on fire. She had walked into the lion's den, pregnant and terrified. She emerged a mother, a celebrated artist, and the sovereign ruler of her own small, happy kingdom. It was not a fairy tale ending. It was something far more real and infinitely more precious. It was a future she had built with her own 2 hands. Chicago's journey wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. She reclaimed her dignity, her power, and most importantly, her son's future from a man who thought he could simply write them off. Her story is a powerful reminder that truth wielded with courage can be the great equalizer capable of toppling even the most formidable empires. It shows that sometimes the most dramatic act is simply demanding to be seen and heard. What did you think of Chicago's incredible act of defiance? Was she a hero, or did she go too far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of strength and survival, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable drama and powerful storytelling. Thank you for listening.